I was 26 when I married into the Grant family. They had money, old money, the kind that made itself known without ever needing to announce it. The kind you didn't earn but inherited, guarded with silver spoons and country club smiles. Andrew Grant, my husband, was the golden son, polished, articulate, Ivy League educated. And when he asked me to marry him after just 6 months, I believed stupidly that I'd found a forever kind of love. The first few months were enchanting. I didn't know then that brave was their family's code for beneath them. Andrew changed quickly after the wedding. The hand that once brushed hair from my face now barely touched me at all. His schedule filled with business dinners. I wasn't invited to charity galas. I was too underprepared for. The house grew quieter around me, though it was never truly quiet. The walls listened, and Evelyn made sure I knew my place. "We don't air our laundry in this house, Sarah." But behind closed doors, I was invisible again. I started keeping a diary, just small things. What I ate, what the doctor said, the names I liked. It was my only safe place. Until the night I went into labor, I was at 37 weeks when it happened. I remember the pain tearing through my back, the ambulance lights. Andrew's voice telling me not to worry, that everything would be handled. I remember Evelyn standing over me at the hospital with a clipboard, her eyes sharper than the contractions. "Just sign here, darling. It's temporary power of attorney just in case you're under too long during the epidural." Legal formality. I don't remember signing. I remember crying. I remember the operating lights. I remember the feeling of being cut open. When I woke up, I was in a different room. My arms felt heavy, and my baby wasn't there. I buzzed the nurse. No one came. I tried again. Nothing. Hours passed. A woman in scrubs finally entered. I asked for my son. She looked at her chart and said, "You've been discharged under family supervision. Your husband and mother-in-law have taken the child home." What? She repeated it as if I hadn't understood, but I had. I understood too well. I rushed to call Andrew. His phone went to voicemail. I tried Evelyn voicemail. Madeline, nothing. I called my own mother, who lived 2 states away. I moved into their estate, nestled in Connecticut's lush countryside, where marble staircases spiraled like fairy tales, and housekeepers folded my nightgowns into perfect squares. Andrew's mother, Evelyn, greeted me with a cold but polite smile. His sister, Madeline, inspected me like I was a handbag she wouldn't have chosen but would tolerate at a formal event. They told me I was brave for coming from a working-class background, brave for studying social work, brave for having ambition. A thick envelope neatly typed full of phrases I never imagined reading: termination of custodial rights, temporary power of attorney, extended mental distress cited by family witnesses. The documents I'd signed in the hospital, the ones Evelyn handed me, had been altered. The dates changed, the clauses extended. They'd had a judge family friend, I later discovered. Sign off emergency custody in the child's best interest. They had taken everything from me: my child, my voice, my identity. When I tried to fight, they buried me in paper motions, injunctions, evaluations. I was painted as emotionally unstable, overwhelmed, unfit. My college thesis on trauma studies was twisted into evidence of personal instability. Evelyn even testified that I had obsessive maternal tendencies and trouble with boundaries. Andrew never looked me in the eye in court. He never even looked sorry. By the time the judge denied my appeal, I had run out of money, hope, and fight. I moved in with my mother in Maine. I worked tables at a diner, kept my head down, and cried when no one could hear. For a while, I thought about ending it all, but then one night while folding laundry, I found my old diary from pregnancy. Inside it was a single sentence I wrote the night before labor: "If they ever try to take him, I will become something they'll never see coming." I read that line over and over until it stitched itself into my skin. They took my son away. Just slid me a hot mug of ginger tea every morning and placed an extra quilt beside me at night. That was her way of holding me quietly, gently. And I needed that because there was nothing left in me to say. Not after having my child stolen from my arms. The only job I could find was waitressing at Molly's Diner off Route 1. The pay was minimum wage, the uniform stiff and starch white, and the regulars tipped in coins and offhanded insults. But no one there knew my last name. No one whispered Grant when I walked by. They just called me Red because of the cheap box dye I'd poured into my hair one night in a fit of desperation, a way to become someone else, anyone but the woman who'd been erased from her own life. I smiled through greasy breakfasts. I poured endless refills of coffee. But every night after the final chair was flipped onto the last table, I sat alone in the supply closet and stared at the only photo I had of my son, his 20-week ultrasound. A tiny blur, a curved spine, a ghost of a face. I'd never kissed. I didn't know what he looked like now, didn't know if he had my eyes or Andrew's jawline. I only knew he existed, and he didn't know I was his mother. Some nights I thought about disappearing entirely, just vanishing into a snowstorm and letting the cold swallow me. But something kept me tethered, an ember, a whisper that I didn't deserve what they'd done, that maybe, just maybe, I could still fight. Then came the shift. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was clearing table 9 when I overheard two women arguing at the counter about a divorce case on TV. She got full custody, one of them said, because she proved he forged her signature on a guardianship document. My hands froze on the plate I was clearing. My heart pounded. Forgery. A forged signature. But they didn't take me, and I was going to rise silently, strategically, and when the time was right, I would come for everything they thought I was too weak to reclaim. Winters in Maine. Don't ask permission. They just arrive bone-deep cold that seeps through walls and wraps around your ribs. I slept on my mother's living room sofa under a pile of mismatched blankets. She didn't ask questions. She didn't offer advice. My signature had been copied onto an entirely separate page, and that's when I knew they hadn't just betrayed me emotionally, they'd committed fraud, and fraud can be proven. I spent the next few days visiting the public library after my shifts. I printed articles about legal precedents. I read about power of attorney laws, guardianship procedures, and legal misconduct. I devoured everything I could find like a starving woman at a feast. But I had no money for a lawyer, no contacts, no credibility. Who would believe me? A broken waitress with frizzy red hair and tired eyes, then like fate reaching out a hand, I spilled hot coffee on a woman's scarf. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," I stammered, grabbing napkins. She looked up from her book, an older woman, sharp eyes behind round glasses, elegant in a wool coat and suede gloves. She smiled gently. "No harm done. It's just fabric, but you might want to check that burner, it's overheating." She said it like someone who understood systems, details, procedures, and then I saw the title of the book in her lap, Women and the Law, Power, Protection, and Precedent, a law professor, or maybe even a lawyer herself. I hesitated, then said the words that changed everything. "Can I ask you a question?" Hypothetically. She didn't blink, just nodded once. That night I poured out the story, not all of it, just enough. She listened carefully, patiently. At the end, she took a card from her purse and slid it across the counter. Agnes Whitmore, it read, attorney advocate retired, but not irrelevant. "I'll help you," she said, "but this isn't a short road. If you want your son back, we'll have to play the long game. You ready for that?" I didn't hesitate. I've been ready since the day they took him. Agnes became my mentor, my teacher, my lifeline. We didn't launch an attack right away. Instead, she taught me the language of war, legal war, contract strategy, loopholes. She showed me how to collect evidence quietly, how to rebuild a foundation without drawing attention. And on her advice, I went back to school. At 30, I enrolled in a night program for paralegal studies. Then 2 years later, I pushed further law school. It was brutal. It was exhausting. I worked double shifts, slept 3 hours a night, and lived off canned soup. But every time I wanted to quit, I opened my journal and reread the line I wrote in the hospital. "If they ever try to take him, I will become something they'll never see coming." And I was becoming her. Brick by brick, case by case, I passed the bar on my first try. By then, nearly 8 years had passed. My son would be turning 8 soon. And Andrew had no idea who I was now. The quiet girl he erased was long gone. I'd shed her like old skin. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I wasn't just back. I was building power in silence. I was earning trust in places that mattered. In courtrooms, in private foundations, in elite boardrooms where whispers became decisions. And one of those decisions was about to come from someone he'd never expect. Because when the Grant family came crawling back to their matriarch for financial rescue, the last person they imagined advising her was me. By the time I turned 35, I had already built something no one saw coming, a reputation. Not a flashy one, not a name splashed across magazine covers or scrolled across news tickers. But in a certain circle, the kind that made quiet decisions behind closed doors, I was known. For my precision, for my memory, for my ability to tear apart a contract clause by clause and leave the other side bleeding without ever raising my voice, I never advertised my background. No one asked if I had children. No one recognized the name Grant when it passed across my desk, and I liked it that way. I lived in the quiet. I built my strength in the silence. I didn't need applause. I only needed one thing: positioning. And then, almost like it was written, the Grant family started to crumble. Their fortune, once as solid as their stone estate, had been bleeding for years. Bad real estate deals, over-leveraged properties, a class action lawsuit involving one of their development firms that Evelyn tried to sweep under the rug. By the time it reached the courts, the family had sold off 3 of their estates and were quietly begging for liquidity behind velvet curtains. I didn't celebrate. I observed Andrew, now married to some boutique heiress. Half his age, was attempting to launch a new fund, Grant Legacy Capital. It was flailing. Evelyn, desperate to preserve the family name, reached out to her mother-in-law, Helen Grant, the last true matriarch, and the only one still holding any real power or money. Helen Grant was sharp, cold, and far more strategic than Evelyn ever gave her credit for. And when she needed legal restructuring to preserve the trust fund for her great-grandchildren, guess who was recommended as the best private legal advisor for the job? Me. Agnes, now fully retired, dropped my name into a quiet conversation at a private estate dinner in Vermont. 2 weeks later, I received a formal invitation to meet with Helen Grant. I wore a simple black dress, no labels, no perfume, just clarity. Helen lived in a sprawling Georgian manor, every inch covered in oil paintings and books older than the United States Constitution. She watched me closely as I reviewed the trust structure, pointed out weaknesses in the tax protections, and suggested a new line of legal succession that would bypass some of the more problematic family members. She smiled at me. "Once your eyes," she said. "They're fierce. That's good. Too many women forget they're allowed to be dangerous." Over the next 6 months, I became Helen's shadow. I was her legal counsel, her confidant, her gatekeeper. I learned everything: who she trusted, what she hated, what deals she backed, and what behaviors she considered betrayal. One day, as we reviewed a revised will draft in her study, she said casually, "You know, you remind me of someone, a girl who once had everything taken from her and didn't cry about it. She built back smarter, stronger." I didn't answer, but she knew I didn't need to tell her who I was. Helen knew how to read between lines, and for the first time I had someone on the inside. Meanwhile, Andrew and Evelyn had no idea. They thought the new legal advisor was just some quiet, efficient attorney who kept their matriarch calm and the lawsuits at bay. They had no idea that every word they said around her was being logged. Every scheme, every lie, every insult they whispered when they thought Helen was too old to hear. I was building my case, but not in court. This wasn't about winning a custody battle anymore. It was about reclaiming my narrative and rewriting theirs. The final piece came in the form of a dinner. Helen decided to host a legacy supper, a gathering of the entire Grant family and its stakeholders under the guise of celebrating her recovery from a minor surgery. But really, it was about making her wishes known, publicly, officially, and legally. She asked me to attend as her counsel. "You should wear red," she said. "You deserve to be remembered this time," so I did. The moment I stepped into the grand dining room, high ceilings, gold fixtures, a mahogany table long enough to seat Betrayal itself, every head turned. Andrew went pale. Evelyn's wineglass nearly slipped from her hand. Madeline whispered something behind a cloth napkin. I took my seat beside Helen, smiled politely, and waited. Halfway through the meal, Helen stood and tapped her glass. "I have an announcement," she said. "I'm revising the family trust and naming a new executor, one who understands what family should be, one who knows what it's like to lose and still rise." She turned to me. "I'd like Sarah to explain the new terms: silence, stiffened, spines, spoons, frozen midair." I stood calm, poised per Mrs. Grant's wishes. "I began the trust will now prioritize any great-grandchildren raised in environments of integrity and emotional stability. In the absence of such, Helen retains the right to grant guardianship and inheritance discretion to an external executor." "And who would that be?" Evelyn blurted out, voice sharp. I didn't flinch, me dead silence. Andrew rose from his chair. "What is this? Some kind of vendetta?" Helen didn't even blink. "No, dear. This is restoration. You took her son, you took her name. Now she has the only one that matters, mine." In that moment, every chess piece on the board flipped. I wasn't Sarah Grant anymore. I was Sarah Whitmore-esque, executor of the Grant estate, and the storm they had created. It now had my name at its center, the morning after the legacy supper. The house buzzed like a disturbed beehive. Evelyn was pacing in the East Wing parlor, making furious calls to attorneys that no longer returned her voicemails. Madeline had locked herself in her suite, likely rehearsing a breakdown in case public opinion turned. And Andrew was already drafting emails to crisis PR consultants. I didn't bother gloating. I was too focused. Helen had signed the new trust documents at sunrise with 2 witnesses, a notary, and a recording legally. It was sealed, irrevocable. For the first time in over a decade, the power dynamics of the Grant family no longer rested on bloodlines and social posturing. It rested on truth, and I had the receipts. Still, one piece remained: my son. He still didn't know me. Not as a mother, not even as a person. Andrew had ensured that. For years, he'd kept me listed in documents as a biological contributor with no visitation rights. He told people I abandoned the child, that I wasn't well. He crafted a lie so airtight that no one questioned it. But now I had something. Andrew feared more than exposure leverage. That afternoon, I summoned him to Helen's drawing room. He arrived last, wrinkled collar, dark circles under his eyes. He still looked like the boy I married, once polished on the outside, hollow on the inside. "You wanted a private meeting," he said, not even bothering to greet me. "I assume this is about humiliation." I smiled gently. "No, this is about options." I laid out a stack of documents on the table between us. Bank transfers, medical records, a dated signature log from the hospital, 2 affidavits from nurses who had since retired, both willing to confirm what they saw the night I gave birth. Forged consent, medical manipulation, emotional coercion, a case airtight enough to end his career, his marriage, and maybe even his freedom. His face paled with every page he turned. "You planned this," he whispered. "No," I replied, "you did. The moment you weaponized my trauma and made me sign away my son." He laughed bitterly. "You'll go public with this." I didn't flinch. "Not unless you force me to." He leaned back, defeated. "What do you want?" I leaned forward, deadly calm. "I want my son to know the truth, and I want to tell him myself." Silence. Then a slow, painful nod. Andrew agreed to a private meeting. He would tell our son, finally, that I wasn't some ghost in the past, but the mother who had been erased. The day I saw my son again, he was standing in the garden of the estate, a soccer ball at his feet. He was tall for his age, with my freckles and Andrew's chin. His name was Lucas. He turned when he saw me, cautious but curious. Andrew stayed several paces behind, arms crossed, mouth tight. "Lucas," he said, "this is someone I want you to meet. Her name is Sarah." Lucas frowned. "Why? Well, she's your biological mother." There was a beat, a flicker of something behind the boy's eyes. Then he looked back at me and said, "Are you the one who used to send letters?" I blinked, my heart slammed in my chest. "You got them." He nodded. "Grandma Helen gave them to me last year, said I should read them when I felt ready." I swallowed hard. "And did you?" He nodded again. "I liked the one where you talked about making grilled cheese and watching storms from the porch. I do that too." It felt familiar. Tears slipped silently down my cheeks. I didn't reach for him. I didn't want to scare him. I just whispered, "That was my favorite memory. You were part of it even before you were born." He stepped closer, just enough for me to see that he was trembling too. "Are you staying this time?" he asked. I smiled through tears. "As long as you want me to." And he nodded, just like that. No courtroom, no press, just truth and time doing what vengeance never could. A week later, Helen hosted one final gathering, this time in the estate's central library. All family members were present. No wine, no performance, just a quiet, cold reading of the official documents. The revised trust was announced. Evelyn, Madeline, and Andrew were removed from primary inheritance. Helen's estate and assets would be managed through an external executor, me, with all decisions to prioritize the well-being of Lucas and any other heirs not raised in manipulation. "You destroyed this family," Evelyn snapped. "You turned her against us." Helen silenced her with a single glance. "No. You did that when you chose control over compassion?" Madeline whimpered something about betrayal. Andrew stayed silent. And me, I stood with the papers in my hands, feeling the weight of justice finally tilted in the right direction. I didn't scream, I didn't insult, I didn't punish, I simply rewrote the ending. They never apologized. Not Evelyn, not Madeline, not even Andrew. They sent silence in place of remorse, thick, bitter silence that tried to pretend none of it had ever happened. That I had somehow appeared in their lives, fully formed, powerful, and inconvenient. But I didn't need their apology, because I never asked permission to heal. I didn't return to the Grant estate after that final reading. I had no reason to linger in a house where love had been currency and power was its only language. Instead, I bought a brownstone in Boston, modest from the outside but filled with light laughter and something I never thought I'd know again. Peace Lucas came to visit every other weekend. At first, he was shy, cautious, trying to piece together who I was and what we were now. I didn't rush him, I didn't push. I just made pancakes with chocolate chips shaped like smiley faces and asked him how school was going. Sometimes he opened up. Sometimes he just watched the rain from the window the same way I used to. One night, as we were brushing our teeth side by side, he said, "It feels normal here, not like the mansion." I looked at him through the mirror and smiled. "That's because here you don't have to be anyone but yourself." He nodded like it was the first time someone had said that out loud. Helen passed away 6 months later, peacefully, quietly. In her will, she left me a handwritten letter that simply said, "You were never just the survivor. You were the reset button." She left everything else to Lucas with me as trustee until he turned 25. Evelyn contested it, of course. She tried to get the will thrown out, tried to frame me as a manipulator, as someone who had preyed on an old woman for wealth, but the courts didn't listen, because this time the paper trail was mine. And every decision Helen had made had been witnessed, signed, notarized, and filmed. The final ruling silenced Evelyn more completely than any words ever could. With the inheritance, I established a private foundation, the Porchlight Initiative, named after the light I used to leave on every night, hoping someone would come back for me. The foundation provides legal support for women forced into signing away their parental rights under duress, especially those manipulated by powerful families or partners. Every time I helped a woman win her child back, I felt another thread in my soul weave back together. I was rebuilding not just myself, but others too. Lucas began spending more and more time with me, not because the courts ordered it, not because a schedule dictated it, but because he chose to. And one night, while we were walking back from a bookstore, he slipped his hand into mine and asked, "Can I call you Mom now?" I stopped walking, turned to him. "You can call me anything you want," I said, "but I've always been your mother." He didn't say anything after that. He didn't need to. That night I cried, not out of sadness, not out of anger, but because something that had once been broken so violently had quietly, patiently grown back into place. The grants became whispers in society pages, once powerful, now politely ignored. Andrew's fund collapsed. Evelyn sold off art to pay off lawyers. Madeline left the country, last I heard. None of them reached out. And I didn't look back, because I had built a life they would never understand, rooted in something more lasting than legacy, rooted in truth. I teach now, part-time at a law school. My class fills up fast, maybe because the students sense I'm not just teaching theory. I'm teaching survival strategy justice with a human face. Sometimes I catch them watching me with curiosity, like they're trying to figure out where I came from. And I smile because the truth is I didn't come from anywhere. They'd recognize I made myself from scraps, from silence, from scars. And I don't need anyone to validate it, not anymore. Epilogue. I keep the old diary in a drawer by my bed, the one I wrote in during my pregnancy. Its battered pages, yellowed corners, curled. Sometimes when the night is too quiet and Lucas is already asleep down the hall, I open it. There's a single line on the final page. I wrote it the night they took him. "One day I'll come back, and when I do, I won't knock." I didn't knock. I walked straight through the door, they slammed in my face, and I turned the lock behind me, not to keep them out, but to finally feel safe.